And one more story for today, and this is actually really interesting. It kind of ties, and I've been talking a lot recently about the COVID crisis and coronavirus and how we are not really adjusting our policy to fit the facts of where we are today. But the topic is there's apparently a brewing dispute behind the scenes within the GOP caucus in the Senate, meaning the Senate, U.S. Senate, which has a majority Republican. So, if they were together, they could get a lot of things done. The U.S. Senate has a majority Republican. They had a caucus meeting, meaning just the Republicans, at a lunch meeting, and apparently they had quite a feud. The basic argument is whether or not the Senate, the Republican-controlled Senate, should get behind the next bailout related to coronavirus is above, would end up being in total above $1 trillion, trillion in new spending as the next COVID-19 aid package. And so this has been sent over by the White House. This is part of something the White House is trying to get behind, saying we've got to get more of an aid package out because of the ongoing trauma related to COVID-19. And fortunately, in my view, you're finding some Republicans pushing back. Rand Paul, being the most outspoken, just is reported to have made, I'm going to show you in a moment a couple of tweets he put out, I guess, or 4 tweets he put out after this caucus meeting was over. But he's pointing out this is absurd. We are acting like we are socialists. We're acting like the government is, job is to take care of everybody and provide them income. There's also a squabble about the public schools. You have many public schools saying they don't want to reopen, but they do want the money sent. They want money from Washington while they're refusing to reopen. We talked in the show, I think last Monday, a week ago Monday, about the attitude of the Los Angeles Unified School District teachers, overwhelmingly left-wingers, who basically said to Washington, if you want us to reopen, we insist on Medicare for all, massively expanded spending for illegal aliens and their families, a tax on the millionaires with an M, a tax on the billionaires with a B, a whole list of flat-out Marxist communist demands. So the teachers are barely cooperating about school opening, and yet they want money from Washington. And so there was quite a scuffle. I don't mean a physical scuffle, but a very loud disagreement within the GOP caucus. And some of the things I want to share about that. One is that Rand Paul is just saying pure money. Are we crazy? You're talking about $1 trillion more dollars. You had the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin over there trying to move this along because he's supporting and doing what his boss, the president, wants. Acting Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, also working on Capitol Hill. Mitch McConnell, who is the majority leader, is apparently behind this. But in this lunch meeting, you had Rand Paul getting really just saying this is crazy. Where are we? Was this the Democrat caucus? And you even had Senator Ted Cruz, our senator from the great state of Texas, saying this is too much. It's just too much. Now, in one way, I have to tell you folks, I kind of hate to hear squabbling behind the scenes between the Republican majority in the Senate and the White House, because obviously the Democrats control the House. The Democrats are happy to spend money at all times on anything except the military. They never spend money in the military. But if there's domestic spending to be had, if there's dollars to be handed out for free, the Democrats in the House are going to be all over it, jumping up and down and clapping. Of course, I'm sure they'll probably even say this isn't enough money. Whatever it was that Trump asked for, you'll have the Democrats saying is not enough. But all of this battle, it is about money, and the money matters. And actually, despite the ridiculous profligate spending by the U.S. government on this COVID thing, and it has been ridiculous, and we don't have the money, and we are in debt, and it's like monopoly money. It's just producing money, sending off money to people. And so that by itself is a huge issue and worthy of opposition. I was very glad to hear Rand Paul spoke up about it and said, we just can't be doing this. But there's a second issue that is underlying this, and that is what are we doing in our country related to our policy going forward on COVID-19. Before I get to that, I'm going to ask Matt the Wonderful to quick show you. These are 4 tweets that Rand Paul put out, which I really found kind of funny, all related to this thing. Just came from the Progressive Democrat, the Republican caucus. They're going to spend $105 billion, B as in boy, billion more on education, more than we spend every year on the Department of Education. Anyone remember when Reagan conservatives were for eliminating the federal Department of Education? He also put out the majority of Republicans are now no different than socialist Democrats when it comes to debt. They simply don't care about debt, and they're preparing to add to pass another $1 trillion in debt this month, combined with the trillions from earlier this summer. And another genius idea heard from both caucuses today: too many schools close this fall, so we have to send more federal aid for daycare. And finally, I really need to double check which caucus meeting I went to today. And I got to tell you, folks, I am thrilled that Rand Paul is speaking out about this, because there really is a growing concern among conservatives around this country that all we hear out of Washington in response to COVID-19 is spend, 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 and more fear. And that leads me to the kind of bigger point I want to make about this story. I'm glad Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and maybe others are going to speak up about just we cannot keep just throwing money at this. But the larger problem is, as I've been alluding to in this show numerous times recently, America is not responding to the facts on the ground today related to the COVID-19 crisis. We're not responding to the reality of the facts on the ground today. We're responding with the same level of fear and paralysis that we responded back in March of this year. We're in July now, we're nearing the end of July, but back in March of this year, when most people became more and more familiar with the coronavirus. I mean, we realize now it came to America in 2019 sometime, and it was being spread in China, but we didn't know about it very much. Got to March, America became aware, and we all went just all in with Dr. Fauci, the head of NIH, and saying, oh my gosh, this is, and we had horrific projections about death counts that were within a couple of weeks. Admittedly, the authors of those studies that were projecting, millions of deaths and horrible circumstances in America walked back their studies big time, basically said, you know what, we were off by orders of magnitude. There are not going to be that many deaths. So we were way off. We're not talking 3 million deaths. And so they pulled their numbers back. This happened both with the study from England, Dr. Neil Ferguson, as well as a study out of University of Washington. They said, the numbers are bad. But we haven't adjusted not just our spending reaction, but our whole policy reaction to COVID based on the facts on the ground today. As we've been talking about, the death rate is going down. The death rate is going down, and that should be a huge driver to helping people become more comfortable with the idea that, we haven't eviscerated the COVID virus. We can't make it go away, but we can treat it we can respond to it based on the facts that we know. So the death rate is going way down. We have all sorts of people in the American left, from the leaders, the governors and mayors. We have leftists in this country, and certainly the media, trying to perpetuate paralysis of fear. It's a pandemic of fear. Perpetuate the fear by blasting headlines out saying, oh my gosh, X number of new cases. This is terrible. New cases. And no one ever points out from Washington to say, actually, the new cases numbers don't matter. New cases are coming along because we're testing more, and the vast majority of people who even are going to test positive, because we're testing people who feel well, who are not ill, you're going to get positive tests, and it doesn't mean you're going to get sick at all. You're going to be asymptomatic, you're going to, or you're going to have very mild symptoms and go on about your life and move forward. So we have false fears put into the American psyche from undue, irrational emphasis on new cases, as though that is a measure of anything. Instead of the death rate going down, the survival rate of coronavirus is 99%. We're not talking about the plague. We're not talking about bubonic plague. We're not talking about Armageddon. We're talking about COVID-19, which has a 99% survival rate. We also aren't talking enough in Washington is not coming out enough from the leaders in Washington, the reality that doctors in this country are finding effective treatments. We don't talk about that. All we do is sit and wait until Fauci or somebody else in Washington says, well, pretty soon we're going to have a vaccine. Yeah, we're working on that vaccine. We're throwing millions of dollars toward a vaccine. And not attention to the fact that doctors in this country have already said they have found first one that came to people's attention, hydroxychloroquine. We've had Dr. Robin Armstrong from Houston on this show because he happens to be a friend and I knew him, and he's a doctor who's been treating completely effectively, treating people who've actually contracted COVID-19, even senior citizens in a nursing home in Houston, completely effectively bringing about their, giving them treatment with hydroxychloroquine and other minor elements that are part of the protocol, and these patients are all getting better. So we're finding effective treatments, hydroxychloroquine. There was another big study. The Henry Ford Center came out with a study saying, yeah, actually this hydroxychloroquine is actually really working. Another big study came out saying the same thing, but somehow we don't transition our policy in Washington to deal with the facts on the ground. And then we have the other remedy. Hydroxychloroquine quickly became, the left tried to malign it because President Trump mentioned it once. And since he mentioned it, or more than once, but since he mentioned it, the left had to quickly just squelch that optimism and hope and say, oh, no, he's crazy, this is terrible. And Fauci, Dr. Fauci gave numerous conflicting statements about hydroxychloroquine, not listening to the doctors on the ground around the country who have been saying, hey, this is working. Hydroxychloroquine is a great solution. We have a great doctor here in Texas, Dr. Yvette Lozano, a friend of mine. She's been treating patients with COVID-19. She sent me a picture of her clinic where she gets there in the morning. The line starts at 6:30 in the morning out the front door and down the parking lot of her clinic because people here, she's a doctor treating COVID-19 with hydroxychloroquine and people are getting better. In addition to that, we had on this show about 2 weeks ago, or July 2nd was the first time, we had Dr. Richard Bartlett out of Midland, Texas, and he's treating effectively, treating COVID-19 with a different treatment. He's using what is an asthma medication, budesonide, and he is administering that for his patients with COVID-19, the asthma medication budesonide, through an inhaler. A nebulizer. So he's getting at the point that there is that he is finding amazing and complete solutions. And I want to send you something because he just texted me today, Bartlett did. If you want to know more about his work, he has a new website, which is covidsilverbullet.com. covidsilverbullet.com. You can go to his website. You can get the paper he has written about this. He explains what his treatment is. He explains what he does. He's making it very public. So you have people pushing back on him saying, well, this hasn't been tested. We haven't had double-blind tests. We haven't had a major pharmaceutical company or somebody else do research, which he obviously freely admits. He's saying he discovered as an emergency room doctor, as he was trying to figure out, because there was no other treatment being offered to people who were very sick with COVID-19. They only were admitted to the hospital when they're very, very ill. If they came in with mild case of COVID-19, they were sent home with a basic take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning message. And only when they're severely ill, they were admitted. And then he discovered all that was happening when they're admitted is they are, monitored and cared for, but they eventually are put on a ventilator, intubated, put on a ventilator. And the ventilators, we've now discovered, are actually killing people. They weren't helping. Maybe they helped some people, but they were also killing people. The point is, Bartlett's brought this new treatment out. He's been on the show talking about it. He's been trying to spread the information around the country. And I'm getting at the point back to the Senate and the argument about this massive spending they're asked to make. We are treating COVID-19 as though we're still in the mental place when we learned about this crisis in March. We learned about this disease in March. And we're not acting like we have facts on the ground as we do now in July of the same year. Here in July, we have these treatments I just mentioned. We have declining death rates. We have the CDC acknowledging they have to stop calling it a pandemic because the death rates no longer justify their definition of pandemic. So CDC saying it's not a pandemic. You have treatments available. You have experts around the country. We talked about this a couple days ago on the show. Experts around the country, in the thousands now of doctors who've signed on a statement to President Trump. We should not be shutting down this country. It is unhealthy to quarantine healthy people. It is unwise. It is bad policy. Don't quarantine healthy people. Let them get out in the world and function. Let businesses function. All of this is coming from the actual on-the-ground doctors and experts who are treating patients, and yet our policy in Washington seems to be still being driven by the people who responded to this crisis in March with an extreme overreaction, as it has turned out an extreme overreaction, and we can't pivot away from the facts we thought were true and we were wrong, the facts in March, to the facts on the ground we have today. And I say all this to say part of the pushback should be from the Republicans in the Senate, we have to talk up. We have to stop agreeing with the panic mode that is being pushed and pressed by the left, because we have to be talking about real doctors treating real patients, not someone like Dr. Fauci, who hasn't treated a real patient in whatever it is, 25 years. He's an academic. He happens to hold a prominent position. I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm saying he hasn't treated patients in 25 years. In America, we should be responding by listening to the people actually treating and finding effective treatments. And because we have those treatments, declining death rate, it's not a pandemic anymore. And we have experts saying kids should go back to school, businesses should open, we should not be in the shutdown mode, we should never be quarantining healthy people. You have all of that, and yet what the Senate is being asked to vote on is a bill that is premised on, rooted in the very frightening picture presented to America in March of this year. And the final point, as I wrap up the show today, the final point on that is this. Many people are recognizing, including we had on our show last week, or the days run together, last week anyway, I think it was, Congressman and Dr. Abraham from the 5th District of Louisiana flew in to come and be on the show to talk about the fact that he's a doctor and he's a congressman, and he said he's been treating COVID-19 patients also with an inhaled steroid like budesonide that is used for asthma, an inhaled steroid through a nebulizer, and he's saying they're all getting better. We don't have to have the panic. He is trying to press and have more people become aware. So part of the answer of the Senate Republicans should be that we're not going to go with this massive spending plan, because we're not going to keep functioning as a country based on what we learned in March. We're going to base our decisions about spending and policies and schools and opening up America based on the facts we have today. We are not dealing with the bubonic plague. We are not in Armageddon. We have an ugly virus. We have sadly lost Americans. Sadly, people have died. More people have died of the flu this year than of COVID-19, but we still don't want any deaths. We don't want people to be sick. We want to try to help people. But when experts are telling us, open up America, open up the schools, let people out of their houses, don't quarantine them, the death rate's going down, we need to let people get healthy and out of their homes and back into life. When the experts are saying that, it's time for policy in Washington to adjust to the new and true reality on the ground. I'll tell you one very, very quick story, and then I got to wrap up the show. But I was making political phone calls, which I end up doing a lot of times, trying to help raise money for something. And I called a guy, and he said, and I called him basically to ask him to donate to this political cause. And he said, I want to tell you, I saw your show with Dr. Bartlett. And he was telling me, he saw my show, the interview with Dr. Bartlett, and on the show, the word Bartlett talked about his method of healing, of treating COVID-19. And he talked about how he went to church on Sunday, ran to a friend of his who's an American Airlines pilot. The American Airlines pilot said, yeah, my stepson's tested positive for COVID. Now I have to get tested, and I've been tested, and I have it too. And he was feeling okay that day, I guess. But a few days later, he became very, very ill with COVID-19. This is the American Airlines pilot telling my friend this, and he said, I remember what you said about this Dr. Bartlett and COVID-19 treatment, and he got that treatment, and within 2 days, when he was feeling terrible and really ill and struggling 2 days later, he was up and about and over at his father's house changing out the carburetor in his RV. And I'm telling you the story to say these are real life stories happening. More people need to be hearing these stories than the fear mongering emanating from Washington. And if you're one of the people who has emailed me to ask for Dr. Bartlett's paper, I cannot urge you strongly enough to instead, I can't keep up. I'm in the tens of thousands of emails I have from listeners asking for Dr. Bartlett's research paper. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical person. I don't have any medical advice. I'm a lawyer by background, and I'm a political activist. But I will give you the link to Dr. Bartlett's paper. You can get it on my website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under the blog. You have to go back and find it, or go to Dr. Bartlett's own website, which he has recently put together, called covidsilverbullet.com. I can't even answer all the emails requesting for his paper, so I urge you to go to his website and get much more information than I can give you.